The sound of breaking metal rattled through the empty house as the old padlock snapped in my hands. Dust swirled in the morning light, thick and gray, as the barn doors creaked open for the very first time. For decades, Samuel had forbidden me to set foot inside. "Never open that door, Evelyn," he would say, with a firmness that allowed no questions. But he was gone now, and in my hand was the rusted key I found hidden in a wall safe, wrapped in a yellowed cloth with a single note. "Now you will see." For a moment, I almost laughed through my tears. How cruelly ironic that only death could give me permission. Yet the weight of that message held something more than control. It was as if he had left me a riddle, or perhaps an apology, waiting to be solved. My fear told me to close the doors again. My heart told me I had already crossed the line. My name is Evelyn Carter, and I am 70 years old. I spent almost my entire adult life married to Samuel Carter. We built a family together, raised our daughter Ruth, and carried the weight of years that were equal parts sacrifice and routine. To the outside world, we were steady, maybe even ordinary. But behind that steadiness lived silence, and behind that silence, secrets. The barn was always one of them. The barn was his fortress, locked away from me like a forbidden chapter of our marriage. I had free reign of every other inch of the property. The kitchen where I baked pies, the living room where Ruth learned to walk, the small garden where I tended to roses in the spring. But the barn, that was Samuel's kingdom, guarded with silence and a heavy padlock. Whenever I asked, he brushed me off with the same cold phrase, "It's nothing for you to worry about." I told myself I was too busy to care. That was the life of women in my generation. Swallow your doubts, fold them into neat corners, and tuck them away like unused linens in a drawer. But every time I saw him vanish into that barn, carrying boxes or slipping back with his hands stained by dust and oil, a quiet ache formed in my chest. What was he hiding from me? Why couldn't I know? After his death, the ache became unbearable. The house was haunted not by ghosts, but by absences. His coat still hanging by the door, the faint trace of tobacco in his chair, the silence of footsteps that would never cross the hallway again. For weeks, I lived in a fog of paperwork and condolences, sorting through the remnants of his life. That's when I found the hidden safe, wedged behind the wardrobe panel. The discovery felt like Samuel himself was whispering to me. Inside was the rusted key, stiff with time, and the note in his unmistakable handwriting. "Now you will see." Those words turned my grief into fire. I sat awake that night, the key lying on the nightstand beside me, glowing under the faint lamplight. I turned it over in my hand again and again. I was torn between anger and longing. Was this his cruel joke? A final way to control me from beyond the grave? Or was it his last attempt to tell me the truth he never dared to share while alive? By morning, my decision was made. The sky was still pale when I walked out across the yard, the grass damp with dew. The barn loomed ahead, its wooden boards warped and darkened by time. My hands shook as I pushed the key into the padlock. The metal resisted, groaning, as though it too carried the weight of his secrets. With a final twist, it snapped open, and the heavy doors swung wide. The air inside hit me like a wave, thick with dust, laced with the sharp tang of rust, and something faintly sweet, like flowers left to rot. My eyes adjusted slowly to the dim light, beams of sun slanting through cracks in the roof. Shadows stretched across stacks of old crates, tarps covering shapes I couldn't yet make out. It was overwhelming. For a moment, I stood frozen in the doorway, the silence pressing against my chest. Memories crashed over me. Samuel's stern face, his warnings, the countless times I swallowed my questions. Now the answers surrounded me, waiting to be uncovered. I took a step forward, the floorboards groaning beneath my weight. Another step, then another. My breath quickened, as if each footfall carried me deeper into a truth I wasn't sure I was ready to face. And then, in the far corner, I saw it. A door within the barn. A second barrier hidden behind stacks of lumber. My heart stopped. What could possibly need to be hidden behind yet another door? I reached for the handle, my fingers trembling, but the moment I touched the cool metal, I heard the faint echo of his voice in my mind. Never open that door, Evelyn. For the first time in 40 years, I was ready to disobey him. The door within the barn resisted me at first, its handle stiff with years of neglect. I pulled harder, my breath shallow, until finally it gave way with a shrill creak. Darkness spilled out, dense and suffocating. I fumbled for the light switch on the wall, and, when the bulb flickered to life, the sight before me made my knees weaken. Stacked from floor to ceiling were boxes sealed with tape, each marked with neat handwriting. Dates, places, and names I barely recognized. Some boxes went back 30 years, others only 5. At the center of the room sat a battered trunk, locked with a smaller key I didn't yet have. My pulse thundered in my ears as I stepped closer, brushing the dust off one of the boxes. The label read, Ruth, School Years. I felt a sting behind my eyes. Samuel had kept records of our daughter's childhood, drawings, report cards, even old letters she'd written to Santa Claus. I had thought I was the one preserving those memories, slipping papers into shoe boxes under my bed. But here, in the place he guarded so fiercely, Samuel had been doing the same. It was both tender and unsettling, a piece of him I never knew existed. Then I noticed something else. Other labels with names unfamiliar to me. Elena, Marcus, Anna. My throat tightened. Who were these people? Family I'd never heard of? Strangers? The handwriting was Samuel's, precise and deliberate. My hands trembled as I opened one box. Inside were photographs, black and white images of a woman I didn't recognize, standing beside a younger Samuel. The air felt heavier. I backed away, nearly tripping over the trunk. It rattled when my foot struck it, and from inside came the muffled clink of metal. My breath caught. Whatever was in that trunk was what he had truly meant for me to find. The note, "Now you will see," wasn't about the boxes of childhood memories or the photographs. It was about this, but I didn't have the key. Frustration boiled up, hot and bitter. Samuel had led me here, step by step, even from beyond the grave, and still he was testing me, still making me work for the truth. I pressed my palms against the trunk, closing my eyes. For the first time since his death, I spoke to him aloud. "Why didn't you just tell me? Why did you lock your life away from me?" The silence that followed was unbearable, thick with every unspoken word that had passed between us over 40 years. As I stood there, my gaze drifted back to the shelves. Alongside the boxes was a stack of folders tied together with string. I pulled one free, and inside were documents, medical reports stamped in bold letters. Cardiac failure. The pages shook in my hands. Samuel had known. He had known all along that his heart was failing, that his time was short, and he never told me. Instead, he hid it here, in the dark, in the one place he swore I would never go. The anger came first, sharp and cold. I thought of the nights I begged him to see a doctor when he complained of chest pains, how he waved me off with that dismissive shrug. He let me believe he was fine, that I was worrying for nothing. He lied. But beneath the anger, grief surged. He had carried this secret not because he wanted to hurt me, but because he thought he was sparing me. That was Samuel, always choosing silence over honesty, thinking his way was a kind of protection. Still, silence can wound deeper than words. I sat on the cold wooden floor, the folder open across my lap, the trunk looming at my feet like a silent judge. My heart was pounding, but a strange clarity settled over me. The barn wasn't just Samuel's hiding place. It was his confession. Every box, every folder, every secret locked away was part of the truth he hadn't dared speak. And somewhere in this room was the answer to the question that had haunted me since I found that note. What did he want me to see? The hours slipped away as I sifted through the stacks of boxes, each one whispering a different piece of Samuel's hidden life. The more I uncovered, the more the barn felt like a labyrinth, leading me deeper into the man I thought I knew but never fully understood. Toward the back, under a fraying tarp, I found something unexpected, a large envelope labeled simply with my name, Evelyn. My hands trembled as I tore it open. Inside were deeds, thick papers with embossed seals, stamped signatures, and maps. The name Carter was printed across every page, but not for this farm. These documents pointed to acres of barren land, hundreds of miles away, in the Nevada desert. At first glance, the land looked worthless. Desert scrub, dry soil, forgotten by time. But stapled to the back of one deed was a more recent document, crisp and modern, a mining lease. The words jumped out at me. Lithium extraction rights. I didn't understand all the details, but I knew enough to realize what it meant. That land, silent and empty for decades, was no longer worthless. It was valuable, incredibly valuable. I sat back hard on the floor, the paper crinkling in my hands. Samuel had owned this for years and never once told me. All those times we struggled with bills, pinched pennies to put Ruth through school, patched roofs instead of replacing them. He had been sitting on land that could change everything. Why? I pressed my palm to the paper, trying to steady my breath. I thought of his note again. Now you will see. Was this what he meant for me to find? Was this supposed to be his final gift, a hidden safety net he had built without ever asking me to carry the weight of the secret? Or was it another form of control, a way to prove even in death that he was always the one steering our lives? The questions clawed at me, but there was no voice left to answer them. Only silence, heavy and suffocating. When Ruth came home that evening, I was still sitting on the barn floor, papers spread around me like the aftermath of a storm. She paused in the doorway, her brow furrowing as she took in the scene. "Mom," she said carefully, "what is all this?" Her voice broke the spell. I gathered the papers quickly, holding them close as if someone might snatch them away. For a moment, I considered telling her everything, the trunk, the boxes, the deeds. But something in me hesitated. Ruth and Samuel had always been close, maybe too close. He spoiled her, gave her the gentleness he rarely gave me. And she adored him, defended him, sometimes even against me. Would she see these discoveries as betrayal on my part? Or would she feel the same anger, the same confusion that churned in my chest? I decided to wait, to let the truth settle inside me before I handed it over to her. "It's just old records," I told her softly, forcing a smile. "Nothing you need to worry about tonight." But the doubt lingered in her eyes. She glanced at the locked trunk behind me, as if she could sense the gravity of what was hidden there. "If Dad left something for us," she said slowly, "I want to know too." Her words struck me like a knife. Us. Even in death, Samuel still stood between us, binding us together and dividing us all at once. That night, long after Ruth had gone to bed, I returned to the barn. I sat beside the locked trunk, tracing the cold iron edges with my fingertips. Somewhere inside was the missing piece, the key to why he had hidden so much from me, and perhaps why he had left behind such a tangled legacy. And deep down, I already knew the moment I opened it, everything I believed about Samuel and about myself would never be the same. The trunk sat before me like a silent dare. Its iron hinges were stiff, its lock dull with rust, but I could feel the weight of what lay inside pressing against me. I had turned the note over and over in my mind. Now, you will see. Every letter felt heavier now, as though Samuel himself were pulling me toward the truth with invisible hands. But the lock refused me. I rattled it, pulled it, even struck it with the heel of my hand, but it would not yield. My frustration burned hot in my chest. I wanted to scream at him, curse him for leaving me pieces of a puzzle without the final part. He was still controlling me, still holding back, even in death. I forced myself to breathe. If Samuel had hidden the trunk, then somewhere he must have hidden the key. And if the safe in the bedroom had led me here, then surely there was another clue waiting. I began searching the barn more carefully. I pulled open drawers in the workbench, overturned jars filled with nails and bolts, sifted through boxes of yellowed receipts and ledgers. Hours passed, my fingers raw from dust and splinters, until at last my hand brushed against something strange wedged between the rafters. A small tin box. Inside lay a second envelope, fragile and worn. My name was scrawled across the front in Samuel's handwriting. My throat tightened as I opened it. Out slid a tiny brass key and a folded piece of paper. I unfolded it with trembling hands. The words were simple. You were always stronger than I let you believe. Forgive me. I clutched the note to my chest. Anger, love, grief. They all tangled together until I could hardly breathe. He had known all along how his silence had diminished me, how his control had turned me into a shadow of the woman I might have been. And yet here he was, admitting it in the only way he knew how. Too late. With the key in hand, I returned to the trunk. The lock clicked open easily, as if it had been waiting for me all along. My fingers hesitated on the lid, but I forced myself to lift it. Inside lay rows of leather-bound journals, neatly stacked and numbered. Their spines were cracked, their pages swollen with age. I pulled one free, the year 1983 stamped faintly across the cover. The smell of ink and paper rose up, sharp and familiar. I opened to the first page, and there, in Samuel's own words, the story of his secret life began. The first entries were ordinary, notes about harvests, weather, small repairs around the farm. But as I turned the pages, the words shifted. He wrote about people I had never met, about money I never knew we had, about meetings that took him away for days at a time. He had been recording everything, not for himself, but for me, for this moment. The deeper I read, the colder I felt. There were hints of business dealings, of land purchases, of debts owed and favors exchanged. There were names, some familiar, like his brothers Carl and Richard, others completely foreign to me. Each page opened another crack in the image I had carried of my husband. The truth was no longer a whisper. It was a roar, pouring out of the journals, filling the barn, drowning out the Samuel I thought I knew. And I realized, with a heaviness I could not yet speak aloud, his secret was not just about love or protection. It was about power. The man I had loved all my life had built a world I was never meant to enter, until now. The journals surrounded me like a storm. I stacked them in uneven piles, each one whispering fragments of Samuel's double life. Hours blurred into the night as I read by the dim bulb swinging overhead. The air grew colder, but I hardly noticed. My hands trembled, not from the chill, but from the avalanche of truths pressing down on me. In one entry, he described the purchase of the Nevada land I had already uncovered. His words were clinical, detached, the kind of language men use when they want to sound pragmatic while hiding the weight of their choices. Acquired 120 acres near Carson. Soil worthless, but potential below surface. Keeping silent until right time. Then, several years later. Rumors confirmed. Lithium deposits in survey. Cannot involve Evelyn. Too much risk. Too many questions. My chest tightened. He hadn't trusted me. He had taken our struggles, our sacrifices, and buried them under silence. While I patched clothes and stretched meals to feed Ruth, he had sat on land worth fortunes, convincing himself he was protecting us. But it wasn't just the land. As I read further, darker notes emerged. Mentions of Carl and Richard appeared often. Deals that skirted legality, promises made and broken. There were veiled references to forged documents, money moved in secret, names of distant cousins and half-siblings hidden from the family record. Samuel hadn't only hidden wealth, he had hidden betrayal. I closed the journal, pressing it to my chest. For a moment, I thought of the Samuel I had cooked for, slept beside, laughed with on rare soft days. The man who held Ruth when she was sick, who built her a swing in the yard. That Samuel felt like smoke slipping through my fingers, while the Samuel in these pages grew sharper, more real, more dangerous. I whispered into the silence, "Why didn't you tell me? Why did you let me carry the weight of ignorance?" The barn swallowed my words, giving nothing back. I reached for another journal, dated just 5 years before his death. My pulse quickened. The entries were shorter, almost frantic. Mentions of chest pain, hospital visits, warnings from doctors. He knew his heart was failing. He knew he was running out of time. And still, he chose silence. One line cut deeper than all the rest. I can't let Evelyn see me weak. She deserves strength. She deserves to believe I can carry her. Tears blurred the ink. For all his secrecy, for all his lies, his fear of being vulnerable had chained him just as much as it had bound me. He thought silence was strength. But silence was what left me here, alone, clutching notebooks full of ghosts. At the bottom of the trunk, beneath the journals, I found a small velvet pouch. Inside was a USB drive, sleek and modern, startling against the relics of ink and paper. My heart lurched. This wasn't just Samuel's handwriting from the past. This was his voice, waiting for me in the present. I pressed the drive into my palm, the edges biting into my skin. Whatever was on it could shatter the fragile image I still carried of him. It could also explain everything: the land, the brothers, the secrets he buried deeper than his illness. I closed the trunk, clutching the drive as if it were the last heartbeat of the man I loved. Tomorrow, I told myself. Tomorrow I would find out what he left me to see and to hear. But tonight, for the first time since Samuel's death, I allowed myself to grieve not just the man I lost, but the marriage I thought I had. And I knew this was only the beginning. The next morning, I sat at the kitchen table staring at the small USB drive as though it were alive. Steam rose from my untouched cup of coffee, curling upward in thin ribbons, but my hands remained wrapped tightly around the cold metal. I had barely slept. All night, Samuel's words from the journals echoed in my mind. His secrets, his fear, his silence. Now, the promise of his actual voice waited inside that drive. I slid my laptop across the table, hesitating before plugging it in. The screen blinked to life, and a folder appeared, simply labeled, "For Evelyn." My chest tightened. Clicking felt like crossing another threshold, one I couldn't return from. Still, my fingers moved. The first video loaded. Samuel's face filled the screen. Older, frailer, the weight of illness visible in his sunken cheeks and tired eyes. But his voice, it was the same low, steady tone that had guided our household for decades. "Evelyn," he began, pausing as if searching for courage. "If you're watching this, then I've already gone, and you've opened the barn." My breath hitched. He looked directly into the camera, into me, as though the years between us collapsed. "I never told you everything," he continued. "Not because you weren't strong enough, but because I was weak. I wanted to protect you, but I see now that I was protecting myself. From your questions, from your judgment, from the way you see through everything." He coughed, the sound raw. "I bought the Nevada land years ago. Back then it was a gamble. I never wanted you or Ruth to carry that risk if it failed. When the surveys showed what lay beneath, I told myself I would surprise you. But time caught me first." I leaned closer, my tears blurring the screen. Samuel's eyes hardened. "And my brothers, you must be careful. Carl and Richard will not accept what I've left you without a fight. They know about the land, about its value. They will lie, manipulate, and use Ruth if they can. Promise me, you won't let them take from you what is rightfully yours." A cold shiver ran through me. He knew. He had seen their greed, their shadows, long before I ever suspected. "I prepared documents, videos, proof of what they've done. You'll find them in the trunk with the journals. Use them, Evelyn. Protect yourself, protect Ruth. This is my last chance to do right by you." His gaze softened, his voice breaking. "And if I could ask one thing, forgive me, for the barn, for the silence, for making you smaller when you were always more than I could handle. Now you will see, Evelyn. Now you will see everything." The screen went black. I sat frozen, the hum of the refrigerator, the only sound in the house. His words sank deep into me, a mixture of confession and warning, apology and command. He had left me a legacy, not just of land and wealth, but of battles yet to come. As the sun climbed higher, Ruth walked into the kitchen, rubbing her eyes. "Mom, you're up early. What are you watching?" I closed the laptop quickly, shielding the truth for just a little longer. "Just old files," I murmured. But the way she looked at me told me she sensed more. I wasn't ready to share Samuel's voice with her, not yet. The time would come, but for now, I needed to carry this alone. Because his warning was already unfolding in my mind. Carl and Richard, they would come. They would circle like vultures, pretending kindness while waiting to strike. And Ruth, my daughter, could become their easiest prey. I pressed my hand over the laptop over Samuel's final words and whispered to the empty room, "I won't let them win." The days after watching Samuel's video blurred into a haze of restless pacing and whispered prayers. I didn't even realize I was speaking. Every corner of the house seemed to echo with his voice, each memory clashing with the revelations I now carried. I returned to the barn almost daily, pulling journals from the trunk and stacking them in order, desperate to piece together the timeline of his hidden life. His handwriting shifted over the years, bold and steady in youth, faint and shaky near the end. But the story unfolded with startling clarity. He had documented everything, every land purchase, every shady deal with Carl and Richard, every secret meeting in town. The journals painted a picture of two men I had never truly seen. Carl, the elder, was the strategist, always calculating. Richard, younger but sharper with his tongue, knew how to charm and manipulate. Together, they had leaned on Samuel for years, drawing him into schemes that skirted the edge of legality. And Samuel, my Samuel, had followed, partly from loyalty, partly from fear, and partly from greed. I closed one journal, pressing my fingers hard against the worn leather. I could almost hear Samuel's voice justifying it. It was for us, Evelyn, for Ruth. But I didn't believe it anymore. Secrets don't build families, they rot them. That evening, the knock came. I knew it before I opened the door, the heavy rhythm of Carl's fist, the lighter tap that followed, belonging to Richard. My stomach turned cold. "Evelyn," Carl said when I cracked the door open. His voice was smooth, but his eyes glinted with something sharper. "We thought we'd stop by, see how you're holding up." Richard leaned against the railing, a sympathetic smile plastered on his face. "We've been worried about you. It's hard losing Samuel. None of us expected it so soon." Their concern was rehearsed, every word dripping with false sweetness. I gripped the door frame, steadying myself. "I'm fine," I said, though my voice trembled. Carl tilted his head, his gaze sliding past me into the house. "We know Samuel left some responsibilities behind, papers, maybe deeds. We thought it best to help you sort through it all, make sure things are handled properly." The air thickened. My heart pounded. They knew. I tightened my grip on the frame. "There's nothing here for you," I said firmly, though fear knotted in my stomach. Richard's smile widened, though his eyes stayed cold. "Come now, Evelyn. Samuel would have wanted us involved. Family should take care of family." Family. The word tasted like ash. I closed the door slowly but firmly, the latch clicking into place. Through the wood, Carl's voice grew harder. "We'll talk again soon, Evelyn. Don't make this difficult." Their footsteps retreated, but the echo of their presence lingered. My legs gave way, and I slid down against the door, my breath ragged. Samuel had been right. They would not stop until they had clawed their way into what he left behind. But as fear coursed through me, something else rose to meet it. Resolve. Samuel's silence had left me in the dark for decades. I would not be silent anymore. The journals, the deeds, the video. They were more than secrets now. They were weapons. And I would learn how to use them. Sleep became a stranger to me. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Samuel's face flickering on the laptop screen, his voice heavy with regret. And layered over it were Carl's cold eyes and Richard's false smile at my door. Their visit had not been a gesture of kindness. It was a warning. The next morning, I returned to the barn, pulling another journal from the trunk. My hands shook as I flipped through the pages. More deals, more half-truths, more shadows of the life Samuel never shared. Then I found a folder tucked between the journals, thinner than the rest. Inside were medical documents, cardiology reports, test results, hospital summaries. The truth settled like a stone in my chest. Samuel had known he was dying for years. The words chronic heart failure appeared again and again. He had been living with a countdown, and instead of telling me, he built walls higher and thicker, filling this barn with the life he couldn't bear to explain. I sank onto a wooden stool, the folder open on my lap, rage mixed with grief in my throat. How many nights had I begged him to see a doctor? How many mornings had I watched him clutch his chest, only to brush me off with that sharp wave of his hand? He didn't just leave me alone in his death. He had left me alone in his dying. I pressed my palm against the folder, trying to steady myself. That's when I noticed another slip of paper wedged at the back, a small envelope addressed in Samuel's familiar script, for Ruth. My heart stilled. I tore it open carefully. Inside was a single page, folded into thirds. His words were brief. Ruth, you are the reason I worked in silence. I wanted you to have a life untouched by fear or want. Forgive me for leaving before I could explain. Trust your mother. She is stronger than she knows. Follow her lead. Tears blurred my vision. I could picture Ruth's face, the softness in her eyes when she looked at her father, the loyalty that sometimes left me feeling like an outsider in my own family. This letter could either bind her to me or break us apart. That evening, Ruth walked into the kitchen to find me staring at the letter, my coffee cold at my side. "Mom?" she asked gently. "What's wrong?" I swallowed hard. For a moment I wanted to hide it, to keep Samuel's words for myself. But I knew secrets had already done enough damage. I handed her the envelope. She read in silence, her lips pressed together, her eyes shining. When she finished, she folded the paper carefully and held it against her chest. "He thought of me," she whispered, "even at the end." I nodded, but my heart ached. Yes, he did. But Ruth? He also thought he could keep us in the dark. He left us with more than love. He left us with battles to fight. Her gaze lifted to mine, uncertain. "What do you mean?" I hesitated, then chose the truth. "Your uncles. They're already circling. They want what your father left behind. And if we're not careful, they'll take everything." Ruth's eyes widened, her faith in her uncles visibly cracking. For years, they had spoiled her, whispered their charm into her ears. I could see the conflict rising inside her. That night, after she went to bed, I returned to the barn once more. The journals, the deeds, the videos, all of it surrounded me like a fortress. For the first time, I understood. Samuel had left me not just secrets, but tools, and I would have to decide how to use them before Carl and Richard decided for me. The morning sun spilled weakly through the kitchen curtains as I spread the documents across the table. The deeds to the Nevada land, the mining contracts, the hospital reports. Every piece of Samuel's hidden world lay before me. My coffee grew cold as I traced my fingers over the bold words, lithium extraction rights. That phrase had become both a lifeline and a curse. I knew enough to understand what it meant. The land Samuel bought in silence had become valuable beyond measure. And I also knew enough to fear what Carl and Richard would do when they realized I held the keys to it. Their visit had already proven their intentions. They wouldn't ask. They would take. Later that afternoon, Ruth joined me at the table. She picked up one of the deeds, her brow furrowed. "Mom, why would Dad keep this from us?" Her voice carried a fragile edge, like she wanted to defend him but couldn't find the words. I sighed, folding my hands together. He said he wanted to protect us. But Ruth, protection without trust isn't love. It's control. And your father? He controlled more than I ever knew. She set the deed down slowly. "Uncle Carl called me yesterday," she admitted, not meeting my eyes. My heart lurched. "What did he say?" He told me Dad left things unsettled, that we should work with them, that it would be better for everyone if the family handled it together. Her voice wavered. He made it sound like you couldn't manage it alone. Anger surged hot in my chest. A mother as ATM, a woman too weak to lead, that's how they saw me, that's how they wanted Ruth to see me. I leaned forward, my voice firm. Listen to me, Ruth. Your uncles are not here to help. They are here to take. Everything your father hid from us, they already knew parts of it, and they want the rest. If you believe them, if you let them into this house, we lose not only the land, but our dignity. She looked at me, torn, her loyalty split down the middle. For so long she had seen her uncles as harmless, charming men with easy smiles and stories that always painted them as heroes. The thought of them as predators unsettled her. I softened my tone. Ruth, I'm asking you not just as your mother, but as a woman who has lived long enough to recognize deceit when it knocks at the door. Don't let their charm fool you. Your father's own words warned us. They will manipulate you. Her lips parted, and I saw the conflict flicker in her eyes. She wanted to believe me, but the bond with her uncles was strong. That evening, when she went upstairs, I returned to the barn once more. The journals seemed to whisper louder now, their pages filled with Samuel's accounts of his brother's lies, their forged signatures, their thefts of land from cousins too poor to fight back. I copied passages, highlighted dates, gathered every scrap of evidence he had left behind. As I worked, a realization settled heavy in my bones. This was no longer just about secrets. It was about justice. Samuel's silence had trapped me for years, but now his words, written, recorded, undeniable, would become my voice. And I knew the day would come soon when I would face Carl and Richard not as their grieving sister-in-law, but as the woman ready to end their reign of manipulation once and for all. 2 days later, the phone rang just after dusk. I recognized Carl's deep, gravelly voice the moment I answered. "Evelyn," he drawled, his tone casual but sharp beneath the surface. "We've been talking, Richard and I. We think it's time we sat down as a family to settle Samuel's affairs. Better to keep things simple, don't you agree?" My grip on the receiver tightened. Simple. That was his word for control, for cornering me before I could gather strength. I forced my voice to stay calm. "I appreciate your concern, Carl, but I've managed fine so far. There's nothing unsettled." A pause followed, thick with unspoken threats. Then Richard's lighter voice chimed in, syrupy sweet. "Evelyn, you don't have to carry this alone. Think of Ruth. We only want what's best for her. Surely Samuel wouldn't have wanted his own daughter to struggle while you try to sort through complicated matters." The words struck deep, the implication that I was too frail, too ignorant to manage what Samuel left behind. It was the same story I'd lived for decades. The silencing, the dismissal, the quiet suggestion that my worth existed only in what I could endure, not in what I could decide. But now, with Samuel's journals stacked on my table and his voice echoing from the videos, I knew better. "Thank you for your concern," I said tightly, "but Ruth and I will handle things ourselves. There's nothing more to discuss." Before they could respond, I hung up. My hand shook as I set the phone down, but my resolve held firm. Later that night, Ruth found me in the barn, papers spread out around me. "They called me too," she admitted quietly. "They said you were hiding things, that you might even try to keep what belongs to the whole family." I froze, anger flaring. "And do you believe them?" She hesitated. I don't know. They sound so certain, Mom, and they love Dad too." Her words cut like glass. For years I had feared this, that Ruth would see me as the outsider, the obstacle, the one standing between her and the men she adored as uncles. I picked up one of Samuel's journals and placed it in her hands. "Read," I whispered. "Read what your father wrote, not the version your uncles feed you. The truth in his own words." She glanced at the cover, uncertainty flickering in her eyes, but she held on to it, clutching the leather spine as though it might anchor her. When she left for bed, I stayed behind, staring at the locked barn doors. Carl and Richard were closing in, and Ruth's trust was slipping through my fingers. But if Samuel's silence had taught me anything, it was this. Truth, even painful truth, is the only weapon against manipulation. The time for hiding was over. The next morning, I woke to the sound of footsteps in the yard. My heart lurched as I pulled the curtain back. Carl and Richard stood near the barn, their figures stark against the pale light. They didn't knock, didn't call out. They just stood there, surveying, like wolves circling prey. I rushed outside, my robe fluttering in the wind. "What are you doing here?" I demanded. Carl turned slowly, a smirk tugging at his mouth. "We were just checking on the property, making sure everything is secure." Richard added, his tone honeyed but insincere. "It's not good for you to be alone out here, Evelyn. We thought we'd lend a hand, maybe take a look inside the barn, help you sort things." The audacity of it left me trembling. That barn had been my prison for decades, locked by Samuel's silence. Now it had become my sanctuary, the only place where his truth lived. And these men, his brothers, dared to demand entry. I stepped forward, squaring my shoulders. "The barn is mine now. Samuel left it to me. You don't set foot inside." Richard's smile thinned, his eyes glinting with malice. "Evelyn, don't make this harder than it has to be. You've got your memories. Let us handle the rest." I shook my head firmly. "No, I will not be your mother's purse, your ATM, your easy mark. Those days are over." My voice cracked, but it carried. For the first time in years, I felt the weight of my words land. They exchanged a glance, a flash of frustration behind Carl's calm exterior, a flicker of anger in Richard's charm. Without another word, they turned and left, their boots crunching hard against the gravel. When I returned inside, Ruth sat at the kitchen table with Samuel's journal open in front of her. Her eyes were red, her face pale. She looked up at me, her voice quiet but certain. "They're not who I thought they were." Relief washed over me, fragile but real. "No," I whispered. "They're not." She closed the journal slowly, pressing her hand against the cover. "Dad knew what they were doing. He wrote everything. Why didn't he tell us?" I swallowed hard. "Because he thought silence would protect us. But silence only protects the ones who want to keep us small." Ruth's hand tightened over the journal. "Then we can't stay silent anymore." Her words steadied something inside me. For so long, I had felt like I was carrying this alone. The weight of discovery, the fear of confrontation, the sting of betrayal. But now, for the first time, Ruth was standing beside me, not behind me, not with them. That night, I opened Samuel's laptop again and found more videos, each one sharper, more damning. In them, Samuel recounted the brothers' fraud, forged wills, stolen land, intimidation of relatives too poor to fight back, proof layered upon proof. I watched until my eyes burned, then saved every file onto a flash drive and locked it away. If Carl and Richard wanted a war, I was ready to fight. The flash drive warmed between my fingers as if it carried Samuel's breath. I sat at the kitchen table with Ruth beside me, the late afternoon light slanting through the curtains and throwing long bands across the papers. We had watched the earlier videos together, his voice, his apology, his warning, but this folder was labeled differently. For truth. I swallowed and clicked it open. The first file was short, a single clip with Samuel looking older, more fragile, but steadier somehow than his tremulous confession. He did not speak to me as his wife now. He spoke to the family, to anyone with a claim on his name. "Listen carefully," he said. "There are people I never told you about. There are letters and names that point to kin I buried for reasons I could not bear to explain. If you need allies, look for them. If you need witnesses, look to those I named." My skin prickled. He had arranged not only proof of crimes, but also the possibility of family I had never seen. Ruth leaned in, her shoulder brushing mine. "Half-siblings," she whispered. The words sounded like a secret hope, fragile and dangerous. The next files were interviews Samuel had quietly recorded. Conversations with distant cousins, depositions he had obtained, even a meeting with a lawyer from Carson who had vouched, in private, for the authenticity of certain deeds. The evidence unfolded like a map, timestamps, signatures, correspondence. And nestled among the documents was a name that made my breath catch: Marcus Hale. He was listed not as a business partner, but as a brother, the product of a long-ignored family branch Samuel had never acknowledged. Samuel's voice in the recording was softer when he said Marcus's name. "He helped me once. He might stand with you," the old man had said. The implication was hopeful. If there were other blood relatives he had wronged or left behind, they might be the very people who could confirm the frauds, sign affidavits, or even demand a fair settlement. I felt a flicker of relief. The idea of allies, real people who could testify, shifted something heavy inside me. Then another clip played, and my stomach dropped. It was a conversation Sam had taped between himself and Carl, back when the land deal was first whispered about. Carl's laugh echoed, light and cruel. "We'll take it, Sammy. We'll make it ours if you let us." The way he said it, like arranging furniture, made me sick. Ruth gripped my hand so hard my knuckles went white. "They knew," she breathed, "all along." Her voice trembled between accusation and wounded sorrow. I squeezed back, anchoring her with whatever steadiness I could find. One file contained a list of names, strangers to me, but clearly connected by blood, charity, or the kind of neutered loyalty that only showed up on paper. Samuel had gone to lengths to track them down, envelopes addressed and returned, phone numbers scribbled, even a notarized letter asking one distant cousin to consider stepping forward if needed. It was as if he had been building a safety net from other lives, other people he had hidden from his own home. We spent the evening making phone calls, the old rotary numbers slow and cumbersome, but somehow human. We reached a woman in Reno named Anna Hale who remembered Samuel from a childhood reunion. She listened, quiet at first, then promised she would search her family records. Another number connected us to a man named Marcus who answered on the second ring, cautious and skeptical, but he agreed to meet us at the diner on Highway 9 the next afternoon. Sleep that night tasted like a bargain. I was exhausted, but lit by a thin thread of possibility. Allies might be messy, imperfect, and stubborn, but they were better than the isolation Carl and Richard offered, the kind of abuse silent and soft that disguised itself as concern and turned a mother into a walking bank account and a daughter into a daughter of the uncles. I thought about the word my caixa elettronico, how those old slights had tried to shrink me into a role that was only useful when I dispensed cash or quiet. I felt the old anger and something new, the seed of courage. When Marcus arrived the next day, he was younger than I expected. Hair shot through with gray, eyes sharp with a lifetime of being overlooked. He carried a stack of papers and a look that suggested he had been waiting for someone to ask him to stand. Over coffee, he traced the documents, nodding slowly. "He was my half-brother," he said finally. "I didn't know much, but I know enough to see the pattern." He tapped a page where a signature matched another we had from the trunk. "This looks forged. I'll give a sworn statement." Relief washed through me like rain. It was not victory. It was the first honest step toward it. Marcus's willingness to speak out ripped open a small door in my chest where hope could breathe. Ruth watched him with something like awe, talent for forgiveness and fury warring in her face. Samuel had left us more than money or land. He had left us a path to justice, crooked and steep, but real. I thought of the words I had been holding close: dignity, freedom, limits. To keep those meant more than clinging to property. It meant refusing to be silenced again. As we stood to leave the diner, Marcus looked at me and said quietly, almost kindly, "You didn't deserve his silence." The sentence landed harder than any insult. I nodded, feeling the shape of a refusal forming. We would gather witnesses, collect signatures, and weave a story strong enough to unmask the brothers. That night, as I locked the barn and walked back to the house, Ruth at my side, the moon held the sky like a witness. For the first time in a long time, I did not feel like a woman on the verge of being used. I felt like someone who could place a limit and hold it. I had evidence, allies, and a stubborn, growing resolve to put an end to the quiet betrayal that had been my life. We would seek justice. We would demand respect. And if the family refused to bend, we would not flinch. The diner meeting with Marcus changed everything. For the first time since Samuel's death, I no longer felt like a solitary widow drowning in secrets. I had an ally who carried the same blood as Samuel, but none of the poison Carl and Richard embodied. Still, I knew this was only the beginning. Proof meant nothing if it stayed tucked in a folder. The brothers would come again, louder, hungrier. That chance came sooner than I expected. A week later, Carl called to announce a family meeting at his house. The invitation was not a request. It was a demand. His voice carried that heavy authority he'd always used to bend others. I considered refusing, but Marcus advised me otherwise. They'll try to make you look small if you don't show. Better to confront them with evidence in hand. So I agreed. The night of the meeting, Ruth and I drove in silence. Her hands gripped the steering wheel until her knuckles whitened, the journal she had been reading resting on the dashboard. "Mom," she said softly, "whatever happens tonight, I'm with you." I turned, catching the firmness in her eyes. The little girl who once adored her uncles without question was gone. In her place stood a woman finally seeing the truth. Carl's house loomed at the end of a gravel road, grander than ours, built on years of quietly stolen money. Richard opened the door, his smile too wide. "Evelyn, Ruth, about time. We've been waiting." Inside, the living room buzzed with relatives, cousins, nieces, people I barely knew. This wasn't just a meeting. It was an ambush. Carl cleared his throat, standing tall in front of the fireplace. "We're here to resolve Samuel's affairs fairly, for the good of the family." The word fairly twisted like a knife. I stepped forward, pulling from my bag the folder Samuel had left me. My hands no longer shook as I laid the documents on the table. "If fairness is what you want, then let's talk about these." Murmurs spread as pages passed from hand to hand. The forged deeds, the contracts signed under false names, the recordings of Samuel and Carl's conversations. Proof layered upon proof. I saw faces pale, eyes widen. Carl's voice rose, trying to drown me out. "This is nonsense. Lies from a bitter old woman who doesn't understand business." But before he could continue, Marcus stepped forward. His presence alone stilled the room. "It's not nonsense. I'm Marcus Hale, Samuel's half-brother, and I can verify what she's saying. I've seen the signatures. I know the land was stolen." His words landed like a gavel, undeniable. Richard's mask cracked first. "This doesn't concern you," he snapped, his charm evaporating. But the room had shifted. The cousins, once complicit in their silence, now leaned in, curious, uneasy. Whispers filled the air. I raised my voice, steady and clear. "For years, you used silence to control us. Samuel carried your secrets, but he also left behind the truth. I will not be your scapegoat, your pawn, or your mother's purse. The days of quiet abuse are over." Ruth stood beside me, her voice sharp with conviction. "And I stand with my mother." The words rang out, shattering the careful web Carl and Richard had spun for decades. Their faces flushed with fury, but their power was slipping. The evidence was undeniable, the witnesses real, the silence broken. For the first time, I saw fear in their eyes. That night, as Ruth and I left the house with Marcus at our side, I felt the weight of years of suppression lifting, piece by piece. There would still be battles ahead, courts, lawyers, threats whispered in the dark, but the tide had turned. I wasn't just carrying Samuel's legacy anymore. I was rewriting it. The weeks that followed were a blur of legal meetings, notarized affidavits, and tense phone calls. Carl and Richard fought like cornered animals, their polished smiles slipping into open threats. But with Marcus's sworn statement, Samuel's journals, and the recordings from the flash drive, the truth was no longer buried under their charm. One morning, Ruth and I walked into the county courthouse together, carrying boxes of evidence. My steps were heavy but steady. I remembered how Samuel once told me not to worry about business, how I had lived decades in the shadows of his choices. That woman, the quiet wife, the obedient partner, the silent mother, did not walk into that courthouse. The woman stepping through those doors was someone reborn. Inside, the brothers sat at the opposite table, their lawyers whispering frantically. Richard avoided my eyes, but Carl glared at me with pure hatred, his jaw clenched so tight it looked ready to shatter. They expected me to shrink, to tremble. Instead, I lifted my chin. The judge listened as evidence unfolded. Forged signatures compared side by side, letters Samuel had written, documents showing the Nevada land was legally purchased under his name alone. When the recordings played, Samuel's voice naming Carl and Richard, describing their frauds, the room fell silent except for the scratch of pens on paper. Carl slammed his fist against the table. He was confused, dying. You can't trust the words of a sick man. But Marcus rose calmly, his testimony unwavering. I knew Samuel. He wasn't confused. He was deliberate, and he wasn't the only one they cheated. I have proof of my own. The judge's gaze shifted, and I saw the scales tilt further. For once, Samuel's silence had become my strength. After hours that felt like years, the gavel struck. The Nevada land was confirmed as my rightful inheritance, with Samuel's documentation and witnesses sealing the case. The brothers' claims were dismissed, their reputation shredded in front of the very family they once ruled with manipulation. When we stepped outside into the sunlight, Ruth clutched my hand. "You did it, Mom," she whispered. Tears glistened in her eyes. We did it. But inside me, I felt more than victory. I felt release. For years, I had been the quiet wife, the woman locked out of the barn, the mother who kept the peace by swallowing her questions. Now I had placed a firm end to their schemes, to Samuel's silence, to the years of being treated as small. That night, back at the farm, I unlocked the barn one last time. The dust still hung heavy, but it no longer smelled of secrets. I walked to the trunk, now emptied of its burden, and traced my fingers along its edge. "I put an end to it, Samuel," I whispered. "The silence, the lies, the weight you left me with. It's finished." And for the first time in decades, the barn didn't feel like his. It felt like mine. The house felt different in the days after the court's ruling. The walls seemed lighter, as if they had exhaled the weight they'd carried for decades. Ruth moved through the rooms with a steadiness I hadn't seen in her since Samuel's death. We no longer spoke in whispers, no longer flinched when the phone rang. The shadow of Carl and Richard had lifted. I returned to the barn one evening, the sun dipping low, painting the sky in streaks of gold and violet. For the first time, I opened those heavy doors without fear, without hesitation. The air inside still carried the scent of old wood and iron, but now it also smelled of freedom. The journals, the trunk, the files, they were no longer a burden. They were the record of battles fought and won. In the far corner, I found the small studio Samuel had built for me. Canvases leaned against the wall, some blank, others yellowed with age. Brushes sat in jars, stiff with dried paint, waiting for a hand to bring them back to life. For years, I had buried my love for painting beneath chores, duties, and Samuel's silence. Now, standing there, I felt something stir inside me. I stretched a fresh canvas across the easel, dipped a brush into paint, and let the colors flow. Each stroke was more than art. It was reclamation. With every line, I felt the years of being minimized, controlled, silenced, fade into the background. This barn, once a prison, had become my sanctuary. Ruth walked in quietly, leaning against the doorway. She watched me paint for a long time before speaking. "Dad built this for you," she said softly. I nodded, my brush moving steadily. "Yes, but he also locked it away. Maybe he wanted me to find it only when I was ready. Maybe he didn't trust I could carry it before. Either way, it's mine now, all of it." She smiled faintly, her eyes shining. "I'm proud of you, Mom." The words filled me more than any court victory could. They were the balm for every wound, the proof that silence had not won. As the evening shadow stretched long, I placed the brush down and stepped back from the canvas. What I had painted wasn't perfect, but it was mine. Raw, honest, alive. For the first time in decades, I felt alive too. I thought of Samuel, of his flaws and his secrets, his silence and his love. He had left me a maze, but I had walked through it and found my own voice at the end. And as the barn doors closed behind me, I carried not just his legacy, but my own, one built on dignity, freedom, and the strength to begin again. I stand before you now, not as the woman locked out of her husband's barn for 40 years, but as someone who finally stepped inside and claimed her truth. That padlocked door was never just wood and iron. It was the silence that chained me, the way I was told to keep my head down, to accept what I was given, and to never ask for more. When Samuel died, he left me his secrets, his apologies, and his regrets. But what he really left me was a choice, to remain quiet or to finally speak. I chose to speak. And in doing so, I discovered something greater than hidden land or family scandals. I discovered my own strength. For too long, I believed the lie that silence was protection, that being small was safety. But silence is a prison. It protects no one but the people who profit from it. When I found those deeds and journals, when I listened to Samuel's trembling voice on that flash drive, I could have walked away. I could have let Carl and Richard strip me of everything, just as they had stripped others. But instead, I stood. I faced them, with my daughter beside me and truth in my hands. That moment wasn't just about land or inheritance. It was about dignity, about saying, no more. There is a word I've carried with me through this storm: limits. It took me 70 years to learn that love without limits becomes control, that family without limits becomes betrayal, and that women, mothers, widows, we have the right to draw those lines and stand by them. To anyone listening, if you've ever been treated as an ATM by those who should have offered you love, if you've been silenced by people claiming it was for your own good, if you've lived under the quiet weight of betrayal, know this: you can put an end to it. You can demand respect. You can choose justice over fear and freedom over silence. As for me, I walk into the barn now not with dread, but with purpose. My canvases are filling with colors that reflect not just grief, but rebirth. Each brushstroke is a reminder that life doesn't end with loss, or even with betrayal. Life begins again when you claim your voice, your power, your right to be heard. The barn no longer belongs to Samuel. It belongs to me. And more than that, it belongs to the woman I have finally allowed myself to become. So I leave you with this. What doors in your life are still locked, waiting for you to open them? What secrets weigh you down because others told you it was safer not to know? And when the time comes, will you have the courage to turn the key? Comment below and tell me what city or country you're watching from. Don't forget to subscribe, share your thoughts, and if you'd like to support more of these stories, you can use the super thanks. And if this story touched you, you might also enjoy the other family dramas I've shared on this channel. See you in the next life story with love and respect.